Today, we're going to look at a build that's broken, but not in a bad way, but rather in a way that turns a support skill into a more enjoyable active skill, and frankly is kind of where I think it should be balanced at, even though this is technically a bug, and that build is the Shockwave Druid, a build that's been simmering on a few channels since the release of 2.4, but rarely catching much acknowledgement or traction in the community, so hopefully this helps remedy that just a little bit. If you want to know the specifics of the formula, I'll link a good video by Macro Boy Boy at the end of the video covering more specifics and his testing of the skill, and why a fully synergized 46 Shockwave deals close to 6600 damage rather than in the mid 800s that are listed. But for those that want the TLDR, simply put, Shockwave has an odd self-amplifying effect where it gives itself a 15% damage boost for every level after the first. So while it doesn't get out of hand, it does get up to actively useful levels. And yes, you want the Maul synergy since it applies before this percent boost, and working with a higher base damage is always helpful. That said, there are a few varieties of this build. This is mainly because for Shockwave to be effective, it only requires a little over 40 points, and how you develop each build will depend on which of these flavors you decide you want to go for, with summoning being the one you will see in the background of this video, since it will generally be the easiest and safest of the bunch, but with the others potentially providing more speed at the cost of more face time with the enemies. The four main flavors I like are going to be Armageddon-based, Hurricane-based, Fireclaw-based, and of course the Summon-based we just mentioned, with Armageddon and Fireclaw being the most aggressive options, Hurricane being a fairly balanced but short-range option with survival buffs, and Summoning being easily the safest option of the four. And for the sake of this guide, we're going to assume you do not want to use your skill resets so that you can play around with them later or even in future patches when this may or may not be removed. For both the fire-based options, you'll actually start out focused on the elemental tree, with Molten Boulder being a really good skill to invest in for both of them, as it provides a powerful damaging tool and synergies well into our future skills. Though as you level up, you will grab the shape-shifting skills, and as you start gaining levels, you'll want to start heavily investing in Shockwave and Maul, since the Shockwave and its synergy are going to be our main carrying skill through Nightmare and Hell, with our support skill really only being brought out to speed things along, especially against physical immunes. If you're going Fireclaw, you'll invest in the claw itself after you finish Maul and Shockwave, and once that's done, you'll go back and finish off the Molten Boulder and Firestorm synergies to top it off for maximum fire damage. Similarly, if you're going Armageddon, you'll spend those later levels maxing that out, then investing in your choice of synergies for it, which for me, I again favor Molten Boulder and Firestorm to maximize the fire damage, since we already will be doing reasonable physical damage with our Shockwave along the way. For the Hurricane setup, it's a bit of a toss-up. Starting out will just be rough, since all your skills are at higher levels, so you'll mostly just be smacking stuff in the face until you get to level 24 for Shockwave. Though you could use Maul along the way to smooth it out a little, you'll still be doing the basic just smacking things though. If you want to do more cold damage after finishing the Shockwave investments, you'll of course max out Hurricane, and then go into Twister and Tornado. If you want something with a bit more survivability instead, especially if you're doing this solo self-found, you may instead consider going into Cyclone Armor, since this will provide you elemental damage absorb, helping buffer you against some of the more dangerous elemental attacks, and it also does extend the length of Hurricane, but it does not boost its raw damage. Lastly, and the one I personally like the most, is the Summoner setup. Your low levels are taken care of with Ravens and building up your prerequisites, then pushing through and getting your Shockwave setup, and after that just investing in pushing your summons further and further. Personally, I like maxing out Ravens and Bear first, and then going back in and investing in the Direwolf if you do have a source of dealing with physical immunes, or investing in Spirit Wolves if you do not, since they deal cold damage, and can actually get up to a reasonable amount of damage there too. Though in the actual gameplay, I focused on Dire since I have a source of amplified damage and Thorns. For Mercenaries, all of these just want something tanky, with pure casters and maybe even the Fireclaw one depending on your weapon choice. A Holy Freeze Act 2 Mercenary will generally be my first pick, with Reaper's Toll being the chase weapon, and then just general survival boosters for the rest of his gear. On the Fireclaw Druid, if you have a good weapon, an alternative can be an Act 1 Mercenary with Faith for Fanaticism to speed up your attack speed quite a bit, since you will be focusing mostly on cast speed for the Shockwave stuff. This will help compensate a bit with the attack speed boost on Maul after the first few hits, squaring it away to get up to decent speed. Main reason for this is we want to actually swing at a reasonable speed even before we get that charge up. On the Summoner though, we have things easy. An Act 2 Thorns Mercenary if you're on a budget, since it will help out a ton with bosses. If you're not on a budget, it opens up a few more options though, with Act 1 or Act 5 mercenaries having options that allow for amplified damage while using Bramble Armor to get that very similar effect. I would avoid using Reaper's Toll for this setup though, since you want enemies smacking your beasts if you are using that Thorns effect. Gear-wise, faster cast and plus skills are going to be king of the hill for all of these builds, with the exception of maybe the Fireclaw Druid, which also needs to juggle their weapon choice a bit, which can make it annoying even at higher end gear. Though thankfully, with the addition of Plague in 2.4, there is at least a bit of an avenue to pursue there thanks to its attack speed, plus skills, and lower resist, helping you square away the fire damage support. And while not for the faint of heart, it is still a ton of fun, and I may end up making a video just for the Shockwave version of that, if the demand is there. That's because the other three, as said, have much more similar gear. On a budget, this means stuff like getting Dual Spirit as soon as you can, with the Sword in Early Nightmare and the Shield in Hell. Things like Lore plus skills, heck even plus skill Druid Pelts being fairly obvious pickups if you stumble across them. This skill can, provided you get enough faster casts from random rings and the dual spirits, safely wander through hell naked, with the exception of areas with stuff like gloams that will kinda snipe you from off screen. Though with bare life from plus skills, you'll sometimes even survive those with a basic amount of lightning resist. As far as chase gear, they slightly vary between the choices, but for the most part the cliche setup is what I'm using here and it will work, with Heart of the Oak and Spirit being your main weapon and shield choice for the obvious faster cast, plus skills, and resist purposes. Dual Stone of Jordans and of course a skill amulet for some plus skills are kind of a go-to, though I'd favor a good crafted amulet over this on the long run, potentially even a safety one for the block boost since we actually get a good casting speed with what we have. Armor-wise, I have Enigma here. Not necessarily for teleport, though it does help if you want to zip through areas to get where you want to go, but mostly because my resists are, well, beyond capped. So why not save some strength points, though if you are struggling for resists, Chains of Honor can be a solid choice here, but I would absolutely go for plus skill armor regardless of my other choices. For helmets, I'm using Jalal's for the total of +4 to shapeshifting skills. You could argue for certain other helmets with very specific roles in them, but this is just a super consistent pickup worth having at least one of, period, for a number of Druid builds, especially since it gives +2 for the other trees as well, and can be socketed to rainbow facets if you're running any of the elemental varieties. For gloves, if you need cold resist, you could go Trangules, but personally I prefer Mage Fist for the mana regen and plus fire skills, since I was using this character to test out the other setups as well. But you still want that faster cast here for pretty much all of the above. On the belt, we're going with the fairly obvious Arachnid's Mesh, plus skills, faster cast, some mana perks, and slow target are all handy additions for these. While there are more options for Fireclaw variants, I still found this to be the solid pick for it, and pretty much a guaranteed pick for all of the other Shockwave builds. Finally, the boots. Outside of the Fireclaw build, they don't really matter. The Fireclaw variant is why I'm using Gore Riders here. For pretty much any of the casters, it's up to your discretion. But it's a good place to get Magic Find, but if you don't need that, plus life boots like Alders or Waterwalks will get a massive boost, doubly so if you're using Call to Arms or Oak Sage or both, in addition to your bare form, since they have a flat plus life boost that does get amplified by these. For the charms, it's all plus shapeshifting skills all the time, and for small charms, resist and life are king. Don't bother with Sundered on this build unless you're going for one of the few purely physical options and have amplified damage, and even then I would say it's not really worth it. Just use Spirit Wolves or your actual elemental skills for that route. That said, the playstyle for all of these is to stun and slay enemies with the Shockwave whenever possible, breaking out the support, or in the case of Summoner, keeping those summons up, in between being Sanctuary's #1 stunner. To the point where I literally kept Shockwave on my left click for every single one of the builds except Fireclaw, and even then it was a left click as a toggle. Now, is this broken fast like Blizzard or Hammerden builds? No. now, but it's definitely an A-tier build that handles even hardcore quite well and is worth trying out, even as a ladder starter character, provided you can tolerate the lack of teleport. So, do you like Shockwave as it is now, or do you think it's overpowered? Mention it down below, and as always, if you enjoyed this, be sure to show it some love down below, and if you want to support the creation of more videos, hit up the Patreon to watch them without YouTube's garbage compression and without YouTube's poorly targeted ads.